So we've been going through our devotions together. We're almost at the end. But each day we've been praying the same invitation. You may have noticed it's broken down into parts. We've been talking about that. The first week we focused on a general invitation for Jesus to come and be part of our lives. And then the second week we got a little more specific. Jesus, come and be in my life this Christmas. Then the third week it was about Jesus, come and be in our community. And then this week, for the next few days, our focus is on Jesus, come and be in our families. I saved it for this week because this is the week when we'll either be gathered with family or be thinking about family. And so that's what we're going to be talking about this week in our devotions. And today I've picked an actual Christmas scripture as opposed to the others that we've been sharing. So stand with me. We're going to read from Luke 2, 1 through 4. Luke 2, 1 through 4. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. So as we turn our attention this week to the family, we begin this morning with the thought that family is something we all have in common. Each of us has a family. Some of us have a large family. Some of us have a small family. Of course, we also know that some of us have family that's close. Some of us may have family we hardly even know. But in one way or the other, we all are a part of a family. That was the case of Mary and Joseph. They had a family. Even before they came together, they were part of a family, a very special family. If you doubt it, just look with me. The Bible is clear about their family history. Matthew 1:16. There we read, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who was called the Messiah. So you've got that list. And then if you turn over to Luke chapter 3, you have another list. And there, beginning in verse 23, it says this. Now Jesus himself was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. He was the son, so it was thought, of Joseph, the son of Heli, the son of Mathat, the son of Levi, the son of Melchi, the son of Janai, the son of Joseph. Whew. Don't you love those words? Those names. Sydney thought I was going to read the whole passage, and it's like, absolutely not. I'm not going to read all those names. If you look at these two, you may think that both of them are tracing the lineage of Joseph because that's what it says. But if that's the case, there is a problem. Matthew's list says that Joseph's father was a man named Jacob. Luke's list says that his father's name was Heli. The other glaring issue is that in Matthew, the genealogy is traced from King David through Solomon all the way down. But in Luke, it starts with King David and then Solomon's younger brother Nathan and then down. So what you have is not the same lineage. You've got two different lines that are there. Both of them descended from King David. So why the difference? Well, the answer to that is that the lineage of Jesus in Luke is traced not through Joseph, but through Mary. That would have been a common practice in that day and age, that you would list the husband in the list of descendants, even though it was the wife who actually was the blood relative. Because of that, in Matthew, when you go through Matthew's genealogy and you read through there and you see a woman listed, immediately you need to stop and say, why in the world in that culture did they put a woman in this genealogy? It's unusual for them to do that. And so you realize that when that is done in Matthew's gospel, it's because something significant about those women is being said that they are in that genealogy. The reason Matthew traces the genealogy the way he does is Matthew is writing to Jewish people, and he wants to prove to them that Jesus is the Messiah. And the prophet said the Messiah has to be from the line of David. They have to be a descendant of King David. And so Joseph puts this genealogy at the beginning of his gospel in order to say, yes, see, Jesus can be the Messiah because Joseph was a descendant of King David. Luke's lineage is a little different. And it's because, as you can see, Luke says something very significant there. He says Joseph was supposed to be. People thought Joseph was the father of Jesus, but the reality was he wasn't. He was conceived by the Holy Ghost. And so Luke, on the other hand, then traces the genealogy of Jesus through Mary to show that even if Joseph wasn't his biological father, he still was a descendant of King David through his mother as well as through Joseph. And so that is something very significant. But what you see from all that is that both of them trace their same lineage from King David. So what that means is if there had been a King David family reunion, they both would have been invited because they both would have been part of his lineage. A family reunion is actually what we find here in Luke chapter 2. Luke 2:4 says, so Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. That's why they were there. They were descendants of King David. That's where King David was from, and so that's where they went. Now, how many of you get your information from the internet? We all do. Come on, you Google it all the time. You want to know something, you Google it. Let me just tell you, be careful when you Google, okay? There's all this talk about AI. You do know that AI is only as smart as the information that is given to it. If you give AI bad information, guess what AI is going to spit out? Bad information. And so when you start to Google things that have to do with Christianity, the Bible, and you're going to get all sorts of different opinions from all sorts of different viewpoints. Now, when we start talking about this census, while Quirinius was governor of Syria, you're going to find when you go online and you Google that for information or whatever search engine you use, you're going to find that people use that to discredit the story of Luke, okay? The story there of the birth of Jesus in the stable, they're going to use that reference to while Quirinius was governor of Syria as a reason to say that story is not true. And they're glad for that. I mean, they're using that because their viewpoint is that it couldn't happen because Jesus is not the Messiah. He's not the Son of God. See, and this is the reason. You say, why? What does that have to do with anything? Well, here's the thing. In Matthew's gospel, it says that the census took place, that when Jesus was born, Herod was king in Jerusalem. Okay? And now when you go to Luke, it says Quirinius was governor of Syria. The reason that is significant is that Herod died 10 years before Quirinius became governor of Syria. Okay? So they take that and they say, see, it didn't happen. It's just a story. It's just made up because these two people did not exist simultaneously in their role. There were 10 years difference. What we do know from public record is that Quirinius, while he was governor of Syria, did have a census. The reason we know that is because it didn't go well. It was pretty bad. See, it's not like what we read here in Luke. He didn't tell people to go to their ancestral home. He told people to go home. If you're out of town, if you're traveling, go home. The reason he wanted them to go home is because they did not just count heads. It was not just a census. It was also a time for figuring out taxes. And so what they did during this census is that they sent Roman officials into people's homes to go through their homes and to document every item they owned in their home so they could be taxed over it. Now think about that here in Texas. Could you imagine in Texas that all of a sudden the government said, we're going to come into your home and we're going to go through your drawers, your cabinets, your closets, the crawl space under your house, the attic in your ceiling. We're going to go through everything and we're going to itemize everything you own. How many of you are willing to do that? Neither were the Jews. And there was quite a rebellion, and it became quite a struggle. And the Roman army had to put it down by force, and there were quite a few people who died over that census. So we know when that census happened. We've got a pretty good historical record of when that census took place. That's different than the census that we read of in Luke. What we find there is that what it appears is that under Herod that there was a census. But as evil as Herod could be at times, Herod still wanted to keep peace. He really tried to make the Jewish people happy if you could just overlook the people he killed. And so he had a census, but his census was different. It was more like a Jewish census. And so instead of going to the place you live, you went to your tribal home and you were counted as a tribe. It was very similar to what you see under King David. It's very similar to what you see as they're coming back from exile. And they're being counted not just as individuals, but counted as part of their tribe, as part of their clan. And that's the reason then that in this story that Joseph went back to Bethlehem, because that's where his family would have been from. I'm going all over. And I want to make sure I don't leave something out. So here you've got what appear then to be two totally different censuses. Now some people have speculated that, well, there were two censuses. But Quirinius could not have taken two censuses. Quirinius was only governor of Syria for 2 years. So there's absolutely no way there would have been two censuses. Which creates another problem in Luke because it's translated as this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And there's no way there were two censuses. There would have only been one. So what does that mean? Does that mean Luke got it wrong? No, not at all. What it may mean is that those who have translated it have gotten it wrong. Remember, this was not written in English, not even King James English. It was written in Greek and Aramaic. And so what we have is a translation. And a possible translation, a good possible translation, is that instead of saying the first census, it actually could read the census that took place before the census that Quirinius took, which changes the meaning and puts it there in line with the census that Herod did. That explanation is a good explanation. There are other explanations that are not good explanations. They really have to stretch it. This works with what we know of history, and it also works with what we know of the Greek language, that could be a very good possibility that it says this is the census that took place before the census that Quirinius took while he was governor of Syria. Now, since Joseph then was a descendant of David, he would have gone to Bethlehem. But here's the thing. When they counted, when you read David and his census, when you read the list of people there as they come back from exile, when you read those lists, they only list the men. And not every boy, not every man, but only those who are of military age and ability. I mean, that's what they wanted to know. How many able-bodied men were there? And so under this census, they wouldn't have counted the women. They wouldn't have counted the children. They would have just counted the men. So when they made that journey, the women wouldn't have gone with them. The women would have stayed behind. The women would have taken care of the house, the family, the children, the household. They would have taken care of all that because the husbands were going to be away for a while. I mean, you know what it's like, ladies, when the husbands get together, and they start yakking and talking sports and all that stuff. You never know when they're coming home. And because this required a journey, it would have been quite a trip. And so the women would have stayed behind. So I say all that to bring this point, which is, then why in the world was Mary there? This census did not require her to come to Bethlehem. I mean, think about it. She's 8 to 9 months pregnant. The journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem on a good day, a good week, would have taken you 4 days travel. Okay? Let's just assume that normally you could walk it in 4 days. She's pregnant. You say, but she got to ride a donkey. Any of you ever rode a donkey? Anybody when you were 8 months pregnant ever said, man, I wish I could ride a donkey? I cannot imagine what that's like. I cannot imagine what 8 months pregnant would be like. But I can't imagine that it would have been a pleasant experience for her to be mounted on a donkey, even side saddle, making her way there. It would have been a very difficult journey. Here's why I believe, and many believe, Mary went. Because back in Nazareth, she was still considered an outcast. Remember, this is a woman who got pregnant before she and Joseph got married. Even back then, they could do the math, and people knew the math didn't add up. Today it's not unusual for somebody to be pregnant before they get married and maybe never even get married. Today, many, even in churches, have decided that they know better than God. And so they've tossed aside God's idea of sexual morality. But in that day and time, in the day and time of Mary, the Jewish people still held to the laws of God. They still believed that you should be pure until you got married. And now, let me just say, what they did not understand was the grace of God, right? That God loves even sinners. So for Mary, it would have been like the story of the Samaritan woman at the well. Do you remember that story? Why was the Samaritan woman there when Jesus found her in the middle of the day? Because of the way the other women treated her. They would have abused her in all sorts of ways because of her indiscretion. Because this woman had been married several times. The man she was married to was not her husband. And so she tried to come when no one else was around. That's what it would have been like for Mary back in Nazareth. Remember, even Joseph was going to put her aside. He was going to cancel their engagement because she was pregnant. It took an angel to convince him to take her home to be his wife. And most people didn't have the advantage of an angel to verify her story. So, of course, when they got to the big family gathering in Bethlehem, we discovered there was no room for them. I wonder if perhaps part of the problem was that her reputation had preceded her. There were already part of the family gossip by the time they got there. Yes, they did not have internet. They did not have cell phones. But it had been almost 9 months. And talk travels, doesn't it? Have you ever felt like you were part of the family gossip? You walked into the room and all of a sudden it became quiet. And you knew the reason is because they had just been talking about you. Maybe you felt like Mary at times, that the only place for you was the barn. Have you ever actually slept in a barn? Anybody here ever actually slept in a barn? A couple of you? All right. Was that together? Separately? You weren't married. You were just sleeping. Oh, me. My son, when we used to go to my parents' house for Christmas and Thanksgiving, there were so many of us that one year my mom announced that my son, Drew, was going to have to sleep in the barn. Now, I don't feel sorry for him. They had a bed in there, and a heater in there, and TV in there. And he could stay up all night watching TV, and nobody would care because nobody was around. Matter of fact, if he wanted in the middle of the night to get out and go somewhere, he could, if there was somewhere in the woods to go. But there wasn't anywhere in the woods to go. But for Mary, the stable was worse than being stuck at the kids' table, even after you turned 40. Some of you understand. Some of you understand exactly what Mary feels like. And perhaps this morning you said, man, I wish you hadn't reminded me of that. Some of you have felt that kind of rejection. And you don't even know why. You don't know what you did. You don't know what you said. You don't know why you have felt that rejection. You wish you knew why, so you could do something about it. Others of you, however, know why you've been treated that way. It might go back to something you said or did, and they've never let you forget what you said or did. Every time you're around them, you can feel their contempt for you. Aren't you glad that's not the way God responds? We may break his heart, but he still loves us. If only our families could learn to love that way. It may not be the bad that you've done. It may be your stand as a Christian. Now, hopefully it's not because you've come across with the I'm better than you attitude. There is no place for that. The only reason we are any way better than them is the grace of God. If it was not for the grace of God, our life would be no better than theirs, and maybe even worse. But at the same time, we know that we who are Christians may face opposition from our families. Over in Luke's Gospel, chapter 12, Jesus talks about it. Verse 51 and 52 says this, "Do you think I came to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but division. From now on, there will be 5 in one family divided against each other, 3 against 2, 2 against 3. Wow. You know, Jesus didn't come to be politically correct. He didn't come necessarily so everybody would get along. He wasn't interested in that. People would be faced with a choice. And those who chose to reject Christ will often also choose to reject those who follow Christ. Now let me throw this in. If politics is what is dividing your family, let me say that again. If politics is what is dividing your family, maybe it's time to put politics aside. I mean, we've had enough of that this past year. Now, I understand your family may not let you put it aside. But remember, family is more important than politics. And your witness to your family is way more important than politics. Now, I don't want it to sound that terrible this Christmas. I believe there's hope for families. God can do amazing things. I mean, have you ever thought about the story of Jacob and Esau there in Genesis? I mean, they were fighting before they were born, twin babies that were fighting inside their mom. As a matter of fact, Esau came out first, but Jacob had his hand on his heel because he wanted to be first. And there was a fight to see who could get first. Why? Because the firstborn son would have a lot more privilege. The babies didn't know that, but it's life. But we know what happened. There are two instances that talk about how tough it was for these two boys growing up. One of them is one day Esau comes in. He's been hunting. He's hungry. He wants something to eat. His brother Jacob has cooked something. And Jacob says, well, I'll give you something to eat if you give me your birthright. What's his birthright? Double portion of his inheritance. He would get the right of the older son. And Esau traded his birthright for something to eat. I've never been that hungry. Not even for fried chicken or fried catfish. Oh, man. Doesn't fried catfish sound good? Oh, man. But I've never been so hungry that I would do something like that. But Esau did. But then it gets worse. His father is dying, or he thinks he is. He actually doesn't, which is interesting in the story. He actually doesn't die. It's several years before he dies. But he thinks he's dying. He's gone blind. He wants to bless his older son Esau before he dies. And so he sends his son off to find an animal, kill it, bring it back, cook it, prepare it, and then he'll bless him. Jacob's mom, talk about dysfunctional. She says, Jacob, let's trick your father. Let me cook something and we're going to pretend that you're your brother so he'll get the blessing. And he did. Esau comes back and found out not only did he lose his birthright, but his blessing. And he says, I'm going to kill Jacob. So Jacob flees and is gone for several years. Finally, Jacob decides it's time to come back. And he's so worried that Esau may still want to kill him that he sends all these gifts to Esau to appease him. But when Jacob meets Esau, there's no hint of any anger, any animosity. Esau has put that all behind. Esau is ready to move on. Family's more important than the problems they had in the past. And the family is reunited. That's what God can do. God can overcome those challenges. God can bring families back together. He did it for them there in Genesis 32 and 33, and He can do it for us. He can break through our guilt like Jacob and give us the strength to head back home and apologize. He can soften the hearts of our family so that they don't even need to hear that apology. But maybe we're at the other end. Maybe we're the ones waiting for the apology so we can welcome them back in our family. Let me ask you, is the apology worth more than your family is? Jesus didn't wait for an apology before He showed up for us, did He? If the problem is our faith, He may be able to help us to, He may be able to so work in us that we will know how to be true to our faith and at the same time be a loving part of our family. I mean, Jesus had a way of doing this. He could eat with sinners. And at the end, they would want to know more or even become a follower of His. May we be that kind of leaven. Not that we preach at our family, but somehow through our life, through how we live, through how we love, through what we say, through what we don't say. Somehow, instead of shutting us out, somehow we're able to love them into the kingdom by the grace of God. He can do that. But can I say family transformation may not happen overnight. Sometimes it's just baby steps. But you know what? Any step forward is better than a step backwards or even staying where you're at. Any step forward. My favorite moment in the story of the prodigal son is when the prodigal son is coming home. He's made the decision. He's going to go home and he's going to ask his father to forgive him. And as he's making his way there, the father doesn't stand there and say, okay, when he gets here and apologize, I might just forgive him. No. He sees his son coming and he runs to him and he forgives him, loves him, embraces him. No apology was necessary. You may be here dreaming of that kind of embrace this morning. You may say, it won't happen this year. It could. But what do you do in the meantime? That's what's wonderful about a church family. God has given us people who can take the place of our families. We've all been there. We've all needed them at times. When my daughter was born there in Kansas City, we were miles away from family. And my wife was missing her mother so much. And we had a pastor's wife, Jake and Helen Blankenship, that were grandparents for us. I mean, they were old enough to be my grandparents. And they loved on us as if we were family. You would have thought we were family the way they loved on us, and we needed it. Tammy and I have returned the favor. We have children all over the world. Not biological children, but people who call us mom and dad because they needed someone, and we brought them in as part of our family. That's what God has called us to do, to be family. And we need to make sure we don't miss those opportunities when God brings them our way. You just might be the answer to someone's prayer this Christmas. This week in our devotions, I'm going to call on you to do something you may not have ever considered. Christmas is usually a time for biological family, but maybe there's room this year for one more. Look around you. Is there someone that really needs to feel like there's a place for them, a family that cares? I've asked those who have lit our candles to share a story about how somebody showed up and it made Christmas special to them, or they showed up and they made Christmas special to somebody else. I haven't shared one, but one I was thinking about this week was when my family went to Senegal, Africa for Christmas. Senegal's in West Africa. And the reason we went is my daughter was feeling like God was calling her to be a missionary. And we thought, well, we've never been on a mission trip. We've never done anything like that, so we need to do one. Well, I have a distant cousin who, him and his family had just moved to Senegal to be missionaries there. And so I sent them a message and said, we are coming to visit you for Christmas. I didn't say, is it okay if we come to visit you for Christmas? I never even thought that they might not want us there for Christmas. So I just sent them a message, says, we're coming to visit you for Christmas. And they responded back, great. And so we did. We went at Christmas, had a great time there with them and ministry. And it was our first real experience of cross-cultural ministry like that. And it was amazing. What we didn't know is that we were the answer to their prayer. See, here they were in Senegal. This was going to be their first Christmas. Senegal, by the way, is a Muslim country. And this was going to be their first Christmas in Senegal. And the other missionaries all went home to their family in the United States and left them there in Senegal. Very first Christmas. And they get this message. Hey, we want to come visit. And they told me, you don't know how much it meant to us that on Christmas morning we sat around the tree with family. And God knew. God put it all together. That's the way our God loves. Family at Christmas can be so special. Where it's not, I pray that God will work in us and in our families. And may He bring a healing beyond what we can even imagine. It can happen as we invite Jesus to come into our families this Christmas. But perhaps this year the answer comes in the form of the family of faith that God has brought us into. Maybe that's where we'll discover the love of family this Christmas. Only God knows the wonderful things that can happen when we truly invite Him to be in our families this Christmas.